Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is FiveXFive and I'm Simo. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to click the subscribe button. So welcome to episode 2 of the Picard finale. I am breaking the episodes up for easier watching. As I mentioned in the previous episode at the beginning, this is a recap and review episode. This is covering episode 10, so part 2 of the 2-part season finale of Picard for season 1. Like I said in the previous video, I feel like both episodes don't really stand on their own strong enough to be judged as separate individual episodes, so they have to be sort of considered as part of a 2-part episode. So that's why I'm talking about them in that context. So keep that in mind if you haven't watched episode 1 of the finale or episode 9 in the season. Watch that and then come back to this episode and then pick up here. So the episode starts off with Raffi and Rios back at the La Sirena. They have the synth magic tool, magic engineering tool that is really a MacGuffin. I don't know, when they introduced it in the last episode and they gave it to them, I was like, oh yeah, because that's not going to be a crotch. That's totally what it ended up being. I was right. I wish I had got that episode out sooner and kind of called that out sooner, but that's my fault. So yeah, the synths had given Raffi and Rios a magic engineering tool that apparently works by just repairing whatever you want to repair with it, just by thinking about it. It's going to be the new MacGuffin. It's going to be the new get out of jail free card, and anytime you can't come up with an explanation for how something happens, they're just going to turn to this tool. I hope they destroy it. I'm not a fan. In other news, Narek has headed to the La Sirena and he's trying to team up with everybody because even though he's a bad guy, he's totally psychopathic. He loves Soji, but he also wants to kill her and all synthetic life because he thinks they're a threat to him, right? So that all makes perfect sense to him. But he's still trying to save the universe, the organic universe anyhow, from the destruction of the synthetic gods. So they're kind of on this, Narek and the La Sirena crew are kind of on the same team. Meanwhile, back at the settlement, Jara, turns out she was kind of playing compliant and she was in fact just trying to position herself in a way that would help Picard out after he was arrested. So she steals one of the dead synth's eye as a way to bypass the biometric security of Picard's jail and she frees him. It's a little bit gross, but hey, good going, Jara. They're really trying hard to give Jara this arc where she starts off being really awkward and squeamish and then ends up somehow being really badass and formidable. But I just can't get past the fact that she panicked and murdered somebody. So I don't know. I'm having a hard time with this particular character arc, and maybe it would feel a lot more natural and I'd be better with it if it happened over a longer frame of time rather than just a few episodes of one season. I feel like an arc from panicked murderer to savior of the universe should probably happen over at least 2 years rather than just, I don't know, in universe probably a few days. So once Narek meets up with the La Sirena crew, he gets to have a meeting with them and he fills them in on all of his beliefs from his perspective, and Gamadon, Tal Shiar Armageddon, Zhat Vash Armageddon. He tells them everything. This is kind of, I don't know, it's a little over the top at this point though, because they've already had this meeting and they're going to have this meeting again later in the episode, so it's too much. I don't care. We'll just skip over that. So the crew makes a plan to get back into the settlement, break back in, and basically overthrow Soji and Soong and Sutra's plan to create the beacon, and because Soji's going along with all this. I don't think I mentioned that, but she decided to go along with her people. Right? She's having a hard time. She finally feels like she belongs somewhere, so she wants to sort of give it that whole college try, I guess. I don't know. I'm just talking shit. She's totally on board and she's trying to help the synths, and so the crew is trying to figure out a way to get back in, convince Soji to stop or break the beacon or whatever, just stop the Armageddon, the organic Armageddon. So something I didn't mention in the previous episode that I mentioned when I originally shot that video before it was lost from the power outage, the power loss. Dr. Soong had been creating a synthetic body which was supposed to house him and his consciousness, or at least that's what the conversation led us to believe, right? But it was kind of up in the air. The audience was probably wondering, are they going to make a new Data and transfer Data's consciousness into that? Or is it for Soong, or what's it for, right? So that groundwork was laid in episode 9 in the first part of this 2-part episode finale, and the body is now ready in episode 2. So we're really kind of pushing towards, okay, so what's the plan for this golem? It's being referred to as a golem. At this point, you're still speculating. It does actually get revealed at the end what happens to it back at the cube, because we had forgotten about the cube, right? But Seven was actually still back at the cube. She's still trying to bring the cube systems online. Back there, Nerissa shows up, and she's trying to use the cube's weapon systems to shoot down the La Sirena that's going into orbit to put up a stand against the oncoming Romulan fleet, right? So Nerissa has it targeted, and Seven interrupts her. They have a little bit of a fight. Seven tosses her over an edge. Cool, not a problem for me. I wasn't a really big Team Nerissa fan in the first place, so not really shook up about it. We never actually see her land, though. We just see her sent over a large edge, so she probably site-to-site transported out. She'll show up. If you don't see a body, it's not real. So the Romulan fleet arrives. The La Sirena crew has been able to take off, and it's just Picard and Jara in the ship, and they're going to hold off the Romulan crew with their one little runabout-sized fighter, and Jara realizes they can use the magic synth engineering tool to create a mirror effect to simulate the Picard maneuver, the infamous Picard the infamous Picard maneuver. I got it out. So we've now used this magic engineering tool to magically repair the ship and get it into orbit, and now we can also use it to create random tactical for combat situations. So like I said, this thing is already going to be used and overused and abused. Not a fan. Still not a fan. During the little battle, Jara pulls the Picard maneuver, and the ship takes some heat, and it looks like Picard he's risking his life. He signals Soji on the surface. He's like, listen, I want to show you how you can be better and trust in other people, and I'm going to do it by giving up my own life to save your people's lives. So he goes into battle with the La Sirena against the Romulan Warbird fleet. The Picard maneuver lasts a few seconds, gives him a little bit of a fighting chance in that sense. But the ship is damaged, and Picard is damaged, and he ends up being critically injured. So he has to be transported back to the planet's surface into the settlement, and he dies. They've been working up to that all season, laying the groundwork for him passing away, and he dies. His character dies. His consciousness is transferred into the quantum computer that's housing Data's consciousness. So they end up giving him a scene where he's able to say goodbye to Brent Spiner in the role of Commander Data inside the quantum reconstruction, which is super cool. If you're a fan, there's a really big nostalgia factor kicking in here. At the same time, we've already said goodbye to Data. We said goodbye to him, Nemesis, and we've had a lot of chances to say goodbye to him in general. So this is just another kind of, hey, we're just gonna bring him back just so that we can kill him off again. And it rings as manipulative and, you know, tugging on the audience's heartstrings as opposed to authentic. So I'm not really a fan of it. They did that. They gave Picard and Data a goodbye scene, and it was really nice. But if you take a step back, I don't feel like it needed to happen. However, in that same conversation, Data does tell Picard he has to go back. They have something for him. They have a way to save him, and he has to go back. And he does ask that Picard ends the simulation and takes his consciousness offline. His reasoning is really touching them too, because his reasoning is self-sacrifice and death doesn't really matter if life itself isn't finite. If there isn't like an actual beginning, middle, and end to someone's life, their existence and their sacrifice is meaningless, right? Which is kind of true. I mean, that's kind of part of the point. He did sacrifice himself in Nemesis to save his friend, Picard, and that was really noble and everything. But it only makes sense if you let him stay dead. But the creators brought him back just so they could kill him off again. So he's right if only the writers had listened to him, right? I'm not going to rant about it, I swear. It's too late, I know. The surprise, though, well, maybe it's not a surprise, but what ends up being the solution for Picard's death, which should probably also not be much of a surprise, is that golem body that Sung had been preparing for himself ends up being used for Picard. They transfer his consciousness into this new synthetic body. And this is kind of another example of the exact same thing they just did with Data that I just explained. They're killing him off just for the sake of killing him off, just like they bring him back and then kill him off again. We brought Picard back, gave him his own show, just so that we could build up a death for him only to save him. It's meaningless. Marvel had this problem in the 90s when I was a little kid. If you keep killing off Jean Grey, people stop caring how much the character dies. And that's really what's happening here. I don't care about Data being killed off a million times anymore because they're always going to keep bringing him back. The same thing with Picard. I don't care if you're going to threaten to kill him if I know that you're going to bring him back like 5 seconds later. I do feel like this was a failure of the writing. That's, again, my opinion. You may feel differently. So I guess my overall thought on this particular story as a finale episode, just on its own, is that I do think it was an interesting story. I liked that they were exploring what happened to synthetic life after the last time we visited this universe, where it's evolved to or gone to, no pun intended. I do like all that, but I didn't like how tied it was to religion and Armageddon and end of the world mythology, and it just doesn't appeal to me. And I've never really been a huge fan of the Romulan storylines anyway. I always find them the least interesting of Star Trek stories. Yeah, it wasn't really for me. There was some really good moments, and yeah, I'm really hoping for something better for season 2. The first episode of the season really opened up strong for me, and it was great seeing everybody in the first few episodes that I was familiar with. But as the series went on, I felt like it was one of the movies that would have been one of the alternatingly bad movies. It could have been skipped. Now, as for my overall thoughts on the entire show and the entire season, I mean, that's what this is about. I do like the show. I do think it's good, and it's definitely worth watching. I can't wait for season 2 next year. Hopefully next year. With everything going on in the world, there's probably going to be delays, so I will recommend the show. But that said, I do think there were a few problems with the show that I had a hard time shaking off. For example, the serialized nature of the show versus episodic nature. The original show was episodic, the new show is serialized. So I generally prefer serialized storytelling. It allows for a lot more depth and nuance and interesting narrative possibilities rather than episodic, where everything is wrapped up by the end of every episode. That didn't really appeal to me, but the original shows were based on that. But what I found watching this show is because of that shift in nature, the stories had a tendency of being bogged down and held back by their tone. So it's easier to wrap everything up and have a positive outlook on life in a 42-minute story narrative and arc. And it's a lot harder to keep an upbeat tone and positive tone and energy for 8 or 10 episodes in an entire season. That entire season ends up feeling like a really negative and sour and pessimistic and cynical take on a universe that a lot of fans have loved for decades, and it's owing entirely to being serialized. Now, that said, if the writers are aware of that, they could go back and say, hey, yeah, the tone of the show really suffered because we kept people in the dark parts of the story for so long as opposed to giving them lighter breaks. It creates a very oppressive tone for the show. If they're aware of that, they can write sort of a counterbalance for that. If they're not aware of that, nothing will change. So we have to wait to see what will happen in season 2 if they learn from that mistake or not. I also think that the creators of the show fundamentally do not agree with Gene Roddenberry's vision. So Roddenberry was a very optimistic guy, but he came from a generation of collectivism and community and an emphasis on society, and that manifested itself in his creative works. His vision of the future is optimistic because it's based on a cooperation of the human race, right? And a lot of the ideas that he presented in his show over decades were based on things like socialism, for example. And I had mentioned it in a previous episode. The future he envisions is not a vision of the future ruled by capitalism. It's one where humans work for the betterment of mankind and they're not looking for monetary compensation. And the future of the world of Earth that he envisions is one where everything is provided for us via something like an implied universal basic income. It feels like either the creators weren't aware of that, didn't pick up on those subtle cues, or, and more likely, politically they disagreed with that because that's all socialism. So it's more likely that they didn't agree with his political views and wanted to de-emphasize the elements of that future that he had intended for the show. So the show diverges in a lot of ways from that vision of the future. We saw that specifically when Raffi talks about how her life collapsed after being kicked out of Starfleet. She discusses her struggles with addiction, and her living arrangements are clearly not ideal compared to Picard living in a chateau. But those are not really the complaints of someone that lives in a have no need for anything society, right? That everyone's taken care of. They're the complaints of someone who lives in a society that struggles with income inequality, which is very much like the real world, and that's very much not Gene Roddenberry's optimistic version of the future. So that's another place that I think the show really does struggle with. We'll see how it handles those issues going forward. And just on like a side note, the show also slyly smooths over some, let me get that out. The show also slyly smooths over some of the weird continuity inconsistencies of Star Trek over the years. So for example, in the past, we've had the show or different series talk about why Klingons appeared to have smooth heads and then later moved into having wrinkly heads. It was enough for us to just accept that times had changed, but they did come up with an in-universe, in-canon explanation for all that back during Deep Space Nine, excuse me. But they've now done the same thing for Romulans. They've shown us Romulans that have like a totally smooth head, like Vulcans. And now they've also shown us Romulans with the prosthetic, and we're now supposed to believe that some are from the north and some are from the south. It's just how it is. So it's a funny way of working it in. But it does work, and it smooths it over. So on that note, that's what I thought of episode 9 and episode 10. This was your Star Trek Picard finale, recap and review, and that's what I thought of the show. Let me know what you think of this video and the show as well, the finale, in the comments below. And don't forget to click like and subscribe so that you can support the channel, and click the bell for notifications so you're notified when a new video has been uploaded. Thanks for watching, everybody. I will talk to everyone soon. Take care.